Sony finally gave us the cameras we've all been waiting for, with the brand new A7C Mark II and the A7C R. It's flagship professional camera quality from the A7 IV and A7R V, but in a more affordable body. And the new body actually has features that aren't present in the more expensive Pro bodies. So there's a lot to talk about. Now, I don't have the A7C-R on hand, but I do have the specs for it, and I will be explaining the differences between the A7C-R and the A7C Mark II. I tested my camera out on several different shoots to cover scenarios for both casual shooters and professional users. And I've got some really surprising results to share with you guys. Also, I'm going to be leaving links down below to both of these cameras with the best pricing. So both cameras come in a brand new A7C body type, and body is probably one of the biggest changes they've made to these cameras. I love how small and compact both of these cameras are, and the body really isn't that much bigger than my A6500, which is an APS-C camera, and it's really just about the same size as the A7C Mark I. And I have to say, it's a pretty big size decrease from the Pro bodies of the A7 IV and the A7R V. You will definitely notice a huge difference. The smaller A7C body is much more nimble in your hands, and it's a great walking around camera if you're someone that's into street photography or city photography. And if you're a video shooter, this new smaller body works really well with a gimbal, and it's a really easy camera to balance even with a big lens. And it's a much easier body to handle overall when compared to the A7 IV or the A7R V. And both A7C cameras also have 7 stops of 5-axis stabilization, which is a pretty significant jump from the 5.5 stops in the A7 IV. And this is going to be really useful for not only handheld, but gimbal work, but also shooting photos with a long lens. And both Sony cameras have a built-in gyroscope that's actually going to record the movement data of your camera. This is going to be really helpful if you use any kind of stabilization software. By being able to read that movement data, the stabilization software is going to be much more efficient and crop your footage way less. However, the new A7C body only has one SD card slot. Thankfully, it's on the side of the camera and not at the bottom with the battery, but when it comes to the battery, it still uses the standard FZ100 batteries, which is a really good battery. It's going to last you for hours, and this camera also has USB-C PD charging, so you can actually charge this camera through the USB-C port. And just for reference, I shot most of this video with the brand new Sony 16-35 f2.8 and the Sony 50mm f1.4. I didn't shoot any focus charts or any technical lens results, but I really felt like both of these lenses deliver amazing quality, and I had no issues when it comes to quality overall. And both cameras have a side-articulating touchscreen, which is 100% touch sensitive, so you can use that screen to not only change your camera settings, but also use it to navigate the menus. Now, the screen itself looks good resolution, it's sharp, but the EVF itself is another story. One thing that I have to mention, the viewfinder in this is like 4 out of 10. I know I'm gonna get a great image, but on this viewfinder, it doesn't look good. And the LCD screen, however, is actually pretty good. It's like a sharp, bright image. It's not a dim screen. LCD screen, 8 out of 10. Viewfinder, 2 out of 10. The button layout is pretty similar to the A7C or the A6000 line. However, they have fixed a few complaints that I have with the A7C and the A7 IV. You now have a mode dial with a smooth toggle switch to flip between photo, video, and slow motion. It doesn't have a lock button like the A7 IV did, which I found really annoying. But inside this camera is a host of amazing technology that I'm really excited to show you guys. The A7C Mark II has a 33 megapixel full frame sensor, which is the same sensor from the A7 IV, and the A7C-R has a 60 megapixel full frame sensor, which is the same sensor from the A7R V. And both cameras now have the Bionz XR processor, which actually does give it brand new features that neither the A7 IV or the A7R V have. And because these cameras have two very different sensors, the combination of frame rate and recording modes is also very different. Now, both cameras can actually shoot in XAVC and XAVC-S in HD and 4K recording modes, and they have a data rate anywhere between 200 to 600 megabits per second, which is a really high data rate, so if you want to shoot professional projects with this, it is totally capable. And almost all of the recording modes are also done in 10-bit 422 color. When shooting with the A7C Mark II, you can shoot 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second, and in this mode, the camera actually uses every single pixel from that 33 megapixel 7K sensor and squeezes it down into a 4K image, which means your 4K is actually downsampled from 7K, which gives you a bunch of really important benefits. First up, you're going to notice that your 4K is significantly sharper compared to just regular 4K, and when you zoom in, you can see that you actually have the detail and clarity of 7K. This is going to make just your regular 4K mode look way better when compared to another 4K camera that doesn't downsample. Second, by downsampling, you're going to get way less noise in your video and a cleaner image overall, even at high ISOs. I shot these images at 10,000 and 20,000 ISOs once the sun had already gone down at f4, and I got surprisingly clean results. Unfortunately, they did not send me an A7C R, however, I do have the specs. The specs for that camera are 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second, but even with a 60 megapixel sensor, it does not downsample in any way. It actually does something called pixel binning, so you should expect just about the same quality as native 4K. But in APS-C crop mode, the 4K in the A7RC is actually downsampled from 6.2K. Unlike the A7R5, unfortunately, the A7C-R does not have 8K video of any kind. If I had to pick between the A7C Mark II or the A7C-R, I would probably go with the A7C Mark II simply because I want that 4K full frame downsample from 7K that's going to give me the sharpest, cleanest image. However, there are still some things that the A7C-R will do better than the A7C Mark II. When it comes to slow motion, the A7C Mark II shoots at 4K at 60 frames per second with a data rate of 600 megabits per second. However, this mode is not downsampled and it's only native 4K. However, the 4K at 60 mode does come with a pretty significant 1.6 times crop, and in this mode you're only using about half the sensor, which is about 10 to 14 megapixels. The A7C-R, however, does shoot 4K at 60 frames per second with only a very small 1.2 times crop, which is not really that significant, and I really wish this was something the A7C Mark II had, and it's surprising that it doesn't considering they both have the same processor. I would think that it could probably do the same thing with that 33 megapixel sensor. When it comes to shooting full HD, both cameras are actually really similar. And if you want to shoot full HD at 120 frames per second, you can shoot it in 8-bit when using the regular video mode and 10-bit color when shooting in the video-specific slow motion mode. And all video modes are also available in S-Log3 and S-Cinetone, and you can also upload your own custom LUTs into these cameras. This way, you don't have to do the whole Sony colors, Canon colors, Fuji colors debate. You can just simply upload your own LUTs, bake it right into the footage if you're shooting an S-Log, and just be done with it. Have your custom colors right in the camera. That debate is officially over. And because these cameras shoot anywhere between 200 to 600 megabits per second, you have a ton of room to play around with these colors, with your light values. You can really create your own custom look if you know how to. One feature that I do feel like is missing from these cameras is Sony's new cinematic vlog mode that was in the Sony ZV-E1 and the ZV-1 Mark II. That would have been a great mode to add to these cameras. These are made to be cameras that are for the everyday person, and that would have been a great mode. When it comes to photos, the A7C Mark II shoots at 33 megapixels at 10 frames per second in 14-bit RAW. The A7C-R, however, shoots at a ridiculous 16 megapixels with 14-bit RAW, but only at about 8 frames per second, which isn't too bad because it's only 2 frames less than 10. I tested the A7C Mark II out on a semi-fashion shoot, and having 10 frames per second was definitely fast enough to capture all of my movement. However, the A7C Mark II doesn't have a very large frame buffer. It will shoot 10 frames per second for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then it's going to slow down to about 5 to 6 frames per second. It's not ideal for someone that needs to shoot for long periods of time, and this is one case where the A7 IV is actually a better camera for photos. Now, the problem that I did have with the A7C Mark II is that because this camera is so new, Photoshop and Lightroom does not recognize the RAW files, but I expect them to be just about as good as the A7 IV or the A7R5, and probably in a few weeks, once those programs get updated, I will be doing a separate video specifically on the image quality from these cameras. Now, you've probably noticed that I haven't talked about autofocus at all in this video, where normally I probably spend too much time on autofocus. That's because when it comes to autofocus, there's some really big improvements in the A7C Mark II, especially when you compare it to the A7C R4. It still has the 759 phase detect autofocus points that you had in the A7 IV, but now it also has a dedicated AI unit for subject recognition and subject tracking. Previous Sony cameras like the A7 IV did a really good job with tracking your subject, and it also knew if you were looking at a human, animal, or a car when you were doing autofocus. But with the new AI autofocus unit, it now tries to predict where your subject's going to move by actually looking at the overall structure of your human body, animal body, or whatever you're looking at, and it now tries to actually figure out where it's going to move and track accordingly. And overall, the autofocus just feels way stickier, way more reliable. I reviewed the A7 IV right before I got my hands on the A7C Mark II, and I immediately noticed a huge difference. Overall, the autofocus just gives me more confidence. When I was shooting a dancer, even when the dancer was spinning with her hands over her face, the autofocus never got confused and it always knew exactly what it was looking at, and it was able to track accordingly. And a really useful tool in both of these cameras is known as focus maps. This is a heat map that shows you exactly what's in focus and makes the autofocus parts either blue or yellow. This way I know exactly what's in focus and I don't have to use annoying peaking colors to figure out if I'm in focus or not. And both A7C cameras now also have AI reframing that can actually track a subject within a frame and frame the subject accordingly. This is not a tool that I personally use, but if you're a dancer, if you're a sports athlete, this is going to be really useful for tracking you, and of course, it's amazing for vertical content if you're a content creator. I'm really impressed with both of these A7C cameras, but I'm also really impressed with the price points. The A7C Mark II is actually going to be about $100 less than the A7 IV, and the A7C-R is going to be almost $1,000 less than the A7R5. Overall, both of these cameras are super impressive. I'm personally going to pick up the A7C-R because I really want a high resolution stills camera, but for video I would probably pick up the A7C Mark II. And if you guys want to check out these cameras, I'm going to leave links in the description down below for the best pricing on both of these cameras, and I'll see you guys in the next video.